Hi, I'm Buck, and this is The Power of Words. Today I'll be sharing my book, A Child Shall Rise, chapter 4, which is called Unfamiliar Surroundings. So if you haven't watched the first three, go back and watch those first, because this is chapter 4. "What about Jared?" Roy cried out, his question repeated in the minds of every member of the Nova family. Janet piloted the hovercraft quickly through the darkened laneways of the city, her tear-filled eyes glancing repeatedly at the rearview monitor. "What do we do? Where do we go? We've got to get him back!" Janet was panicking, and her piloting was becoming erratic. "Pull over, Janet. They're not following us." As the vehicle stopped, James turned to face his distraught children. "Are you all okay? They didn't hurt you, did they?" The children all shook their heads. "Why did they take Jared? What was that thing they were running over our heads? Why did it light up differently and make different sounds when they used it on us? Is Jared okay? Dad, what are we going to do?" James sputtered. I don't know. I don't know." Jared sat unconscious, strapped to the back seat of the Black Agency shuttlecraft, with a large metallic helmet covering his head. "We lost 2 men getting this kid. He better be worth it." "I don't really care. I just want to get him out of this shuttle and away from me. If he's anything like that Bostrel kid, I don't want to be within a mile when he wakes up." A few minutes later, the black shuttle approached a massive structure which sprawled for several blocks and seemed to reach the clouds. The pilot punched a security code into the comms. "Shuttle 137 acknowledged. Approach Landing Base 7 and stand by for tractor beam." As the pilot complied with the instructions, an entire section of the complex began to move and separate, revealing an entry hatch below the surface. They were going underground. Despite Jared still being unconscious, the agent spoke to him. "Welcome to your new home, kid. You're the agency's problem now." For several hours, William crisscrossed the endless web of cables, conduits, panels, and other internal workings of the huge complex, looking for a way to get to the outside world. Hopeless! No one was ever meant to be in this section, so why would they make a way out? There's no hatches, chutes, portals, or anything else. "The only way I'm getting out of here is if I can somehow break back into the operational areas of the agency without being detected, make it to an exit hatch without being detected, and get through the perimeter security defenses, again without being detected." William bowed his head as if in submission to the unimaginable idea of escaping this place. Through all his scrambling around, he had completely lost his bearings and didn't even know if the wall panel he had found himself next to was separating him from the internal workings of the agency or from the world outside. Slumping down on a large support beam and leaning back on the wall, he suddenly realized how exhausted he was. No way out, no food, no water, no hope. And William drifted off into a troubled sleep. What seemed like minutes, but was actually over 2 hours later, he awoke to a familiar noise above him and in the distance. Slowly realizing this wasn't all part of a bad dream, he shook the cobwebs out of his head and stood up. He was sure the sound he had heard was that of a maintenance droid, like the one he had seen earlier. Racing across a beam, hoisting himself up another, and crossing several conduits, William came to an area distinct from anything he'd seen in the labyrinth. There was a flat plastisteel landing, by far the largest flat area he'd seen since entering this hidden world. It seemed to William that most of the conduits and cables were leading to this area, and he was pretty sure this is where the droid had gone. On this landing, he also noticed that there were walls that seemed to form a room of some sort. As he neared the wall to inspect it closer, a hidden hatch opened vertically. So, this is where the droid went to. Ducking to enter through the little hatch, which had only been intended for the droids to use, William saw several droids hooked up to power consoles, apparently recharging. Approaching the nearest droid to investigate, he noticed that it wasn't merely recharging stations they were attached to. This must be how they monitor the droid's systems and update their programming. Carefully, he began to inspect the power stations, looking for anything he could use to help his situation. Next, he began to look over the droids. An idea crept into his mind. It was a long shot and would probably give up his location and even get him killed. But he was quickly running out of time anyway and didn't have any other ideas. Reaching into his field bag, William removed a micro-torch and a system scrambler disk. And now we wait. For long hours, William watched the droids, waiting for his opportunity to act. He was still exhausted from the previous day's events, and he was hungry, thirsty, and growing weaker by the moment. Slipping in and out of consciousness, he thought, I don't want to die here, not like this. Wait, what's that noise? The second droid from him began to power up, with whirring noises, beeps, and different color lights coming on. Then it disconnected from the power station and began to move away. But before it could exit the room, William placed the activated system scrambler disk on the back of the droid. The unit beeped once, stopped in its tracks, and lost all power. William held his breath. No alarms, no new flashing lights on the power console, and no reaction from the other droids. Nothing. Step one finished. But that was always going to be the easy part. James, Janet, and the oldest four Nova children sat in their hover car on a darkened corner of a dilapidated section of Old City. "Dad," Gary said, "where are we? I don't like this place." James looked around, only now realizing how far they had traveled in their effort to escape the black shuttle. "I think we're in Old City, Gary, and I don't like this place either." "Old City?" Janet felt panicked. "We've got to get out of here." "No, honey, not yet. The government won't come look for us here." Janet looked at her husband in shocked disbelief. "James, we can't stay here. You've heard the stories. If even the government is afraid to come here, what chance do we have?" Old City was what remained of the original colony that first settled on Renus Prime. It was once an idyllic metropolis of well-laid-out housing and business estates, intersected by beautiful canals and surrounded by lush green parks. But that was long ago. The buildings were now in various states of ruin. The canals were now cesspools of human waste and rubbish, and the parks had become overgrown, vine-tangled wilderness. Most respectable citizens had left the city long ago to get away from the rising drug problems, violent gangs, and government corruption. Eventually, even the government itself was forced out, as judges, police, and other officials became targets of the gangs. A new drug called euphoria had hit the city. It got its name from the effects it has on the human brain, blocking pain receptors and causing feelings of complete happiness and pleasure. Also known as mist because of the way it is delivered through an inhaler, euphoria quickly replaced all other drugs on the streets. Those who had recently misted felt no pain, had no cares in the world, and seemed to float on a cloud of total joy and satisfaction. The gangs controlled the mist, which also gave them control over an army of addicts willing to do anything to get their fix. One block after another was lost to the gangs and the drug lords that controlled them, as they began to assassinate police and politicians. In a last-ditch effort to take back the city, soldiers began a street-by-street battle with the gangs, but they were outnumbered and outgunned, and forced to withdraw. Old City was abandoned to anarchy and ruin. "Janet, we don't have much of a choice. Those agents took our son. They killed Nigel, and probably would have killed us too. We need time to plan our next—" "Mom, who are those people?" Bill interrupted, pointing out the window at three men who were trying to creep up to the back of their hover car. They all wore dirty, loose-fitting clothes, had long, unkempt hair, and gaunt, expressionless faces. "They're scary." Janet fired up the motor. "That's it. We're out of here." And the Nova family sped away into the night, careening down the once busy but now seemingly deserted thoroughfare. "Those mistheads are not getting my kids." "Jared, Jared, wake up." Somewhere in his subconsciousness, a soft voice was calling Jared back. His eyelids slowly began to open. "It's okay now, Jared. You're safe. Our Papa is with you, and I'll never let those bad men hurt you again." Jared's young mind was trying to process what had happened to him. The last thing he remembered, there were men that had shot his dad, and he had been grabbed, Then nothing. Where's my mommy and daddy? They're fine, Jared. Your daddy wasn't injured, just put to sleep for a short time. They wanted to be here when you woke up, but they couldn't, so they asked me to look after you. My name is Arpatha, and you and I are going to be good friends. Would you like that, Jared? Jared looked up at the large woman, tears beginning to well in his eyes. I just want my mommy. Aw, I know you do, sweetie. Arpatha put her arms around the boy and pulled him close. You'll see them real soon, I promise. But for now, there's someone I'd like you to meet. Her name is Lyra, and she's around your age. Arpatha led Jared to a door, punched her code into the access panel, and the door slid open. Sitting in the middle of the floor, drawing on a hollow pad, was a young girl. Jared, I'd like to introduce you to Lyra. Jared's eyes widened, and he was clearly startled by what he saw. What is she? Jared whispered, staring at Lyra. Few people in Rina's prime had ever seen an alien up close, and Jared had no idea of what to make of her. Don't be afraid, Jared. She's from a planet called Quinson, and she may look a bit different from us, but she's just a little girl who needs a friend. Lyra looked at Jared, her large white eyes framing purple iris and black pupils. Her skin was a sky blue with shifting patterns of turquoise, which gave it the appearance of shimmering sunlight through clear water. Her face was long and angular, with small ears, nose, and mouth. Lyra smiled nervously, reaching out a hand toward Jared's arm. She's only got 3 fingers, Jared exclaimed, pulling away from the girl's touch. It's okay, Arpatha replied. Let her touch you. That's how she talks to people. Jared sheepishly took a half step forward and extended his arm, allowing Lyra to touch it. Immediately, his fear and hesitation began to vanish, being replaced by calmness as Lyra held his arm and stared into his eyes. As he returned her gaze, Jared noticed that Lyra didn't blink, and that the color in her eyes, like the color of her skin, seemed to constantly shift and change shades. She likes me, Jared declared suddenly. But she's sad, and she... She what, Jared? What were you going to say? Nothing. Arpatha looked down at the boy questioningly. You two already keeping secrets from me? That's all right. Lyra never talks the way you and I do. She shares what she is feeling by touching someone and allowing them to feel her emotions. On her planet, everyone communicates that way. But Lyra is extra special. Can I talk to her? Jared asked. Yes, she can understand your words, but it's better if you touch her while you are talking, so she can feel what you feel as you talk. Jared put his hand on Lyra's. Hi, Lyra. I like you too. His words were simple, but the feeling behind them told Lyra that Jared was sorry for being scared of her at first, and that he was amazed by the way she looked and how she communicated. Okay, you two. I can see that you're going to get along just fine. But for now, little man, I need to show you to your room, and then give you the tour of the school. Lyra can join us later for breakfast. Jared started to say goodbye, but Lyra, still holding his arm, sent a wave of emotions crashing into him. Jared's eyes began to fill with tears. She doesn't want me to go. Arpatha looked down at the young children. Well, I guess you'll just have to come with us then. Jared's room was small but cozy, and it was just around the corner from Lyra's. There were several other rooms, but he hadn't seen any other children around. The classroom was huge and lined with panels of varying sizes. Jared touched one to open it, but discovered it was locked. Arpatha put her hand on Lyra's shoulder. I'll catch up with both of you later, but for now, can you show Jared how to get to the cafeteria? Walking down the corridors and all through breakfast, Lyra kept her hand on Jared's arm. When someone walked past, he could feel Lyra's emotional response to them, whether she liked them or not. One particular man, tall and dressed in black, with pale skin and black hair, caused her to react with great fear that Jared could feel coming from her, but didn't know why. "Who is that?" Jared whispered after the man had passed. Lyra gripped his arm tighter and looked intently into his eyes. Jared could feel her emotions and turmoil as they went from fear to something like confusion and finally to frustration. Jared knew Lyra was trying to tell him something, but he didn't know what. She broke eye contact with him, looking down and taking her hand off of his arm. Arpatha approached the table and sat down next to Lyra. "Can you excuse us for a while, Lyra? I'd like to discuss some things with Jared. You can catch up to us later when class begins." Lyra frowned slightly, nodded her head as she got up, and walked away. Arpatha smiled at Jared. "There are some things I'd like you to know about Lyra." As Arpatha spoke, Jared learned that Lyra had a younger brother named Bostrol, who was also at this school, but that he was different, that he had trouble understanding things and controlling his emotions. He learned that her parents had been killed in an accident a few years ago, and that this school had been her home ever since. Jared began to think of his own family, and the last time he had seen them. His little face drooped, and he began to cry. All right, that's chapter 4 of A Child Shall Rise. I'll upload chapter 5, which is titled Bostrol, in a few days. Come back and watch the continuing adventures of Jared Nova and his family. And thank you for tuning in to The Power of Words. I'm Buck. Please like and subscribe. See you next time.